Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 4th annual South African cadre training workshop, which is presented to you by waqf South Africa. And our first guest is Zainul Kaji, who doesn't need much introduction to a South African audience. He's one of the founding CEOs of waqf South Africa, and this year he was also voted in the top 500 financial personalities in the Islamic world. So Zainul Kaji from South Africa is a very proud local product. Zainul Kaji, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me. Thank you for having me here.
Just very briefly, just give some of the background as to how you got into the whole waqf landscape. 1984, more than 30 years ago.
Yes, I think that was probably a game changer and probably an eye-opener for me, because that was the first time that I actually heard about the word waqf. This was at the Islamic Development Bank training program, one of the very first English language training programs that was ever held. That was in 1984, yes.
Was part of the discovery of waqf the fact that it is an integral part of Islamic history? I mean, if we look at history, the Ottoman Empire was basically a waqf, Palestine was a waqf, it's our history.
Yes, absolutely. It's part of our Islamic civilization, part of our heritage. It comes from Medina, as you know, as one of the founding places of the whole waqf system, and it spread throughout the Muslim world and, of course, throughout the non-Muslim world as well.
And now we see the whole waqf concept enjoying itself in South Africa, the southern tip of Africa.
Yes, absolutely. I think what is happening now is that the whole waqf system is in revival mode. And on the back of the revival of Islamic finance, Islamic banking, and people have realized that the waqf system, which is one of the foundation and cornerstones of the Islamic economy, that needs to be now brought into the forefront as a social financing mechanism. And that has been there as part of our heritage, but needs now to be brought to the fore.
And of course, the whole idea of waqf is gaining great currency in South Africa, isn't it? I mean, we have huge rich-poor divides. Muslim community in South Africa is fairly well off. So it seems as if our community has a huge role to play just in poverty eradication for a start, bearing in mind that this is a cadre training workshop.
Absolutely. I think, well, poverty alleviation is one of the major issues here in South Africa. Unemployment and inequalities and so forth, and we know that South Africa has got the highest Gini index in the world, reflecting the great disparity between rich and poor. So all social finances that Muslims have at their disposal should be utilized not only for the upliftment of the Muslim Ummah, but also the broader community in which we find ourselves. After all, we are followers of Rahmatul Lil Alameen.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the waqf South Africa, you have made great strides in the last couple of decades, and it seems as if in the last 10 years, things have really started to move. I mean, this year already you've had a lot of big events, and you seem to be focusing a tremendous amount on education. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I think that education is, I think, probably one of the most important empowerment tools and empowerment mechanisms that we have. And I mean, there's great emphasis even in Islam on education. And we find that as a waqf institution, that is one of our priorities, and we are involved with tuition programs, we're involved with mathematics upgrade programs, and we know that South Africa is ranked like almost bottom of the ladder when it comes to mathematics education. So that is something that we going forward strongly with teacher training and also matriculation preparation examinations and so forth in regard to mathematics, and at the primary school level with literacy upgrading, because we find that language is probably one of the most retarding factors as well in the schooling system.
Zainul, one thing that strikes one is that when the waqf South Africa does something, you try and do it with quality. I mean, we're here at a high-class venue. You've got guests from all around the world, experts from all around the world. Would you agree that as Muslims, second best doesn't count anymore? We can't aim for mediocrity. We've got to go for the stars.
Absolutely. I think, I always think of the Allah is Al-Jamil, He loves beauty and He loves excellence, and we have to go for good quality, and everything that we see in the universe, all His creation is the best. And why shouldn't we do, everything that He loves? And of course, we don't have to be extravagant. We can still be simple. But I think we have to have good quality, and alhamdulillah, if you're saying that we've been doing this, then shukr, we're very grateful for that accolade, actually.
And my final comment, the impact of waqf South Africa. What sort of impact are you seeing coming through in terms of all the programs that have been running, and of course the investments that you've made?
Look, that's, I think, a little bit more difficult to answer, because it's a qualitative change that we are looking at. We're looking at change of behavior also in terms of how we give our charity, because waqf is not necessarily a new way, but there is a paradigm shift into now capital giving rather than consumption giving. So that change is taking place, and that impact is happening as well. And we are finding more and more people actually realizing the value of the whole waqf system, and that more and more people are beginning to contribute, and it's actually going on to the business community as well as the broader community as well. And we're finding it also that now even very, very poor communities in the townships are saying, we need the system to start operating even in our communities. So inshallah, I think the word is spreading, the seeds are beginning to germinate, and we'll see this mushrooming, inshallah, as we go forward. It is a long-term process, but I think with all the support that we're getting from various quarters, the ulama, the media outlets and so forth, I think that more work needs to be done, but alhamdulillah, to date, there has been significant progress locally as well as internationally, and we are very happy with that.
Zain al-Kaji, shukran.
Afwan, jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome yet again to the 4th annual South African cadre training workshop, which is presented to you by waqf South Africa. Our special guest is Dr. Hisham Daftedar. He is an Islamic banker and an expert in waqf, and he has been involved with the Islamic Bank and many other institutions for many, many years. But Dr. Hisham, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Doctor, first of all, you've been in Islamic banking for many, many years.
Yeah.
What got you interested in Islamic banking as opposed to conventional banking?
Actually, the main thing that drew me to Islamic banking is the ethical basis of Islamic banking. Islamic banking is about sharing of risks and rewards. This is different from the conventional banking, where only the one party that stands to benefit from it at the expense of the others. So there is Islamic banking is a mutual benefit.
So in other words, in Islamic banking, we don't sell each other fresh air or what they call toxic debt.
No, we don't, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Now, tell us something. I mean, Islamic banking in places like South Africa, like New Zealand, where Muslims are minority communities, is a fairly recent phenomenon, only about the last 20 years or so. How important do you think, before we go to waqf, how important is the Islamic banking model in a society like South Africa or New Zealand or Australia or the United Kingdom?
Right. Well, actually, Islamic banking has proven itself, and it came to the limelight, especially after the global financial crisis that stormed the world in 2008, and the Islamic banks withstood that storm very well. and that was an attention drawer. And it made even conventional banks look and see, what has Islamic banking got in order to sustain this trouble. And they started, to open up into Islamic banking, and many conventional banks started opening up Islamic windows or even branches to do Islamic banking. So the model has really proven itself, and the industry has been growing in leaps and bounds. The Islamic banking, which is recent in comparison to the conventional banking, has really witnessed tremendous growth over the last 30 years, and it continues. Growth of something like 10 to 20% per annum is phenomenal by any standard.
No, it certainly is. Explain to us the interest, the link that you've got between Islamic banking and waqf. I mean, obviously there is a link between the two, but explain it to us.
Actually, waqf has always been the mainstay of the Islamic economy. There is tremendous wealth in waqf. And there are many waqf assets that have been lying idle. And Islamic banking, in essence, is development banking. Mm-hmm. This is the link that brought Islamic banking into waqf.
Time for a break. We'll be back right after this. Welcome yet again to the 4th Annual South African cadre training workshop, which is presented to you by waqf South Africa. Our special guest is Dr. Hisham Daftedar. He is an Islamic banker and an expert in waqf, and he has been involved with the Islamic Bank and many other institutions for many, many years. And of course, I mean, waqf is probably one of the oldest Islamic institutions, isn't it? How old is Islamic banking? I mean, it may sound like a stupid question, but I have to ask it.
Islamic banking, recently, I think it has about 30 years, I would say, or maybe 40 years, with the first Islamic bank. Some people say, the first Islamic bank. There are few claims. Dubai Islamic Bank, they claim that they are the first. Of course, they were amongst the pioneers. Al-Rashhi Bank also, that started with this Islamic banking, compared to the conventional banking, which is very, very old.
Now, the cadre training workshop here in South Africa, it's all about empowering people, particularly empowering people to rise out of poverty. What sort of homespun advice can you give to somebody watching us right now in terms of how effective a simple waqf can be, bearing in mind the Islamic finance model?
Well, Islamic banking is about development, as I said, and the development of the community is a major concern, and this is where the tie-up is with the waqf. Now, empowerment, community empowerment comes from creating employment, from education, from healthcare. All these factors work together in order to, bring a healthy community working together. And waqf has been very instrumental in these areas. One of the major contributions of waqf recently to the empowerment is the SME financing. And this is where waqf is directly contributing to empowerment, to employment, to self-sustainability of the community. We find that people who otherwise are sitting there receiving alms and charities are now themselves are zakat paying, from the help that they are getting from waqf.
Do you think the important thing we have to remember is that waqf is not giving somebody a fish and then walking away? It's giving them a fishing rod and a pond as well.
they are giving them all the means in order to be able to produce and be productive. So it is the fishing rod, the net, and not only that, teaching them how to use these and monitoring them as well. You know.
Yeah. Do you think that the important part of developing a waqf anywhere is the fact that a person has to know how to use it? There's no point in developing one if one hasn't got the tools or the knowledge to actually make it actually work.
Well, this is the responsibility, again, that Awqaf is finding, that they'll have to provide the tools, but they have to provide the know-how, and they'll have to provide the control, because the waqf, contributions will always remain as a waqf, and therefore they have the responsibility in making sure that these are properly used for the purpose they are given. So waqf, although it is classed as charity, but at the same time is not a charity, as such. It is empowerment. That's what it is.
My final question, we know Islamic banking has gone off the Richter scale. All the graphs are going upwards. Has any studies been done on how effective Awqaf has been in the last 20 or so years?
Actually, over the last, I would say, 30 years, there has been a sudden revival of Awqaf. Awqaf is no longer, and I should say, is no longer the domain of the religious people. Now it is the concern of government. It is the concern of the private sector. It is the concern of everybody. So it is no longer exclusively religious. This is what I want to say, because it is working in the market with the private sector. It is doing what governments ought to be doing. When you are talking about education, when you're talking about healthcare, when you are talking about social services, really these are tasks of governments. So when Awqaf is doing this, they are really taking a burden off the public purse. And this is where the attention is now being focused on really giving Awqaf the support. So when the government is giving tax breaks to the Awqaf, they are not giving it just because, the government wants to look good. No, because they are beneficiaries, just like everybody else.
Dr. Hisham Daftada, thank you very much for your words.
Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the 4th annual South African Cadre Training Workshop hosted by Awqaf South Africa. Our next guest is Mr. Hussein Ben Yunus, and he is from New Zealand. In fact, he's an engineer, and he'll tell us something about his experiences and how this all relates to Awqaf. Mr. Ben Yunus, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me.
You have an interesting background. You are Libyan by birth, now New Zealand passport holder, an engineer in New Zealand. And the interesting thing about New Zealand, they did a survey many years ago, and they found that New Zealand had more characteristics of a so-called Islamic state than Islamic states. But that's a footnote. But tell us something about your experience with waqf. You are apparently the Secretary General of Awqaf in New Zealand, but yours is a practical encounter. Tell us about your practical experience.
We ended up knowing about Awqaf through turning charitable waste into Awqaf revenues. And the biggest waste we identify, and it's relevant to New Zealand, is when Muslims sacrifice an animal every year, and it's been widely known as the Qurbani industry. The wool and the skin and the bone of this animal are not utilized. So we start our project to turn this wool and skin into byproducts, and then have them sold, and the money comes back into as waqf development. That's how we started, and this led us to Islamic capital market, and we innovated a model, we call it smart waqf, that is integrating Awqaf into the Islamic capital market.
So that's a very interesting model, and of course coming from New Zealand, where Muslims are in fact a minority in the community. How does the greater New Zealand community accept what you're doing in terms of the waqf development and the use of all the waste material from the Qurban?
We are very fortunate. We have a very supportive government and a very understanding community. There is no restriction for us to achieve any outcomes as long as our idea is in line with the objective of what we are claiming to achieve. We have got all the support we needed from all over the community official or government official, or from even from embassies around the world. New Zealand embassy were very supportive.
What sort of benefits are rolling in to the New Zealand Muslim community as a result of the waqf that you created?
Our objective is for the mankind, so we are not really looking at benefiting a special community. We are aiming to benefit the most needed people, regardless of their color or background. And so we believe we're still a young organization, 6 years old, but we are now leading the development in the Islamic social finance globally. And we are hoping to establish the world's first waqf farm that's specifically for the livestock supply in New Zealand and other countries. So the benefit will be huge to New Zealand economy and also to the beneficiary all over the world.
In fact, all over the world, I think, is the term to use, but it's the first time I've heard of a waqf farm. In fact, it sounds like a very, very exciting concept that, I mean, this is a farm that will just carry on forever, and its benefits will accrue to, as you say, not just Muslims, but the whole larger society forever.
Yes, so we are aiming, just to give you an idea, statistically, you are talking about 5 million sheep slaughtered every year during the Eid time by Muslims who live in the West. This is a huge number of animals that you need to process them in 4 days. New Zealand has the capacity and the industrial capability of processing large quantity halal way. And New Zealand also has the best farming industry, and there we are hoping once we establish the farm in New Zealand, we can export this know-how to the communities and countries that they need support or state-of-the-art technology to manage farms all over the world.
Are you hoping to obviously export some of this knowledge to South Africa, where we have a lot of land? It may not be as green as New Zealand, and our cows and sheep and goats have to walk around a bit more for food. But I'm sure you'll agree that there's a lot to offer in terms of South Africa.
Definitely. I was invited at the same time to two workshops, one in South Africa and one in Canada, and I decided to come here because I believe South Africa is an ideal place to replicate the model. And also we were initially inspired by to establish waqf New Zealand by waqf South Africa. So we even replicated their constitution into when we established ourselves.
Oh, that's interesting indeed. Do you think that the whole waqf model is a very exciting concept? Because a lot of people are telling me that the waqf model in many senses replaces government. And history tells me that the Ottomans, for example, did very little bureaucracy because it was the waqf that was actually keeping the people going rather than the state. The state just provided soldiers and the legal system.
Well, waqf definitely can play a major role in developing the mainstream community. And the best things of waqf does not ask you anything in return. So they're just doing it for the objective. Where government maybe or any other institution, they're doing it so you re-elect them or you give them the support. But waqf is doing it purely for the beneficiary, regardless of what they will give them back. And that's the beauty of waqf, I think.
Absolutely. I think you'd agree that waqf is actually, by its very nature, it's non-political.
Exactly, 100%. And waqf will fail if the people who are running it use it as a political or something to promote themselves. And that's one of the reasons that waqf didn't really progress if the manager of the waqf try to abuse it or something like that. But in general, awqaf is always neutral.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 4th annual South African cadre training workshop hosted by waqf South Africa. With me now is Fayrouz Mohammed, who is the first deputy chairperson of SANZAF, the South African National Zakah Fund. Fayrouz has a qualification in accountancy. In fact, she worked for a company called KPMG, and I'm sure everybody knows who they are. What we're going to be having a talk about is corporate governance, particularly in relation to NGOs and other societies. But Fayrouz, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran, Brother Shafiq, for having me.
Pleasure is ours. Now, obviously, you have an experience in the corporate world in terms of accounting. People say it's very boring, but that's just for us creative people. But it's a very necessary thing, isn't it? I'm sure you'd agree. Any organization at the end of the day has to account for the bottom line.
Absolutely. I think it's very important for the sustainability and the continued growth of an organization to ensure that they are accountable to whomever they need to be.
Now, you have been involved with SANZAF, the South African National Zakah Fund. How important is it for an organization like that, which is dealing with people's money, the public's money, to be accountable? That must bring a huge responsibility upon the organization's shoulders.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we tend to not realize the huge responsibility that we take upon ourselves. But I think a lot of the in terms of corporate governance that we need to ensure that we comply with, and in terms of implement, is the fact that being transparent and being accountable to those, for example, like SANZAF being a public, at least an organization that dealing with public funds, that we're actually accountable to the public. We however find that sometimes with these organizations is that because there's a lack of accountability and the public not holding our organizations accountable, that these then result obviously in the closing of organizations. But if these organizations are run in a manner of good corporate governance, ensuring that they comply with regulated compliance, then these organizations will surely prosper. So yes, I think having good corporate governance within the structures will surely ensure continued growth.
Now, you talk about accountability, that the public also enjoys a sense of this. Do you think that members of the public actually need to be vigilant, and not in the obnoxious sense, but in the positive sense, like wanting to know where their last dollar or their last rand actually goes?
Absolutely. I think sometimes as donors, we feel that our obligation is discharged once we just hand over the funds. However, I don't think it stops there. They need to ensure whomever they hand these funds over, that it's spent in the manner that it was meant to, that they account for these funds the way it should, and that the administration of these projects that they've obviously donated to is run in an effective and efficient manner.
Now, if you look at the whole NGO landscape, how critical is all of this accountability, this corporate governance, when we see the economy shrinking? Because that tells me the donors are also going to get some fatigue in the whole process.
Absolutely. This obviously decreases the amount of spending that the consumer has. However, I must say from a SANZAF perspective, in terms of because we're different, we have a different model in that we receive zakah funds. And in terms of the wealth of the South African community, Muslim community, it is huge. And there's a huge amount of zakah that's actually not being paid over. And that obviously would result in the beneficiaries not receiving what they are meant to receive in terms of their haqq, in terms of what Allah's granted them. So we also need to realize that we are withholding these funds, and that is obviously in terms of not the system the way it's meant to be.
Do you think corporate governance really becomes important in terms of not just accountability, but in terms of delivery? Because if you are running properly, it means you can do your work properly.
Oh, no, absolutely. Also ensuring that you have skilled staff and employees to ensure that these projects are run the way it should. But also ensuring that communities, the project that you run is basically in terms of the need of those communities. It's no use you running a sewing cause if there are more men. So you obviously need to ensure that the projects that you run are basically in terms of what that community needs to be able to develop, and then so that they can become self-sustainable at the end of the day.
Now, you mentioned the word skills in terms of corporate governance. I'm sure you'd agree skill is very important, because asking a journalist to do the accounts will lead to failure, and asking the accountant to do journalism will also lead to a failure, surely. So in other words, would you agree that skills is an absolute prerequisite? We can't just drag people off the street and expect them to perform, because they won't be able to.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. Not just from a staff perspective, but also in terms of from a governance board perspective. You'd find, for example, you cannot have a board of a medical society having 5 CAs and nobody with medical experience. That wouldn't make sense. So I think it's very important that the skills also are relevant to in terms of the work that they do. And you're rightfully saying that you cannot have a journalist doing an accounting work, because it's a very specific skill that you need. And from that, in terms of accountants are very driven in that ensuring that you have the checks and balances in place, ensuring that you have oversight, and in terms of management review. So definitely the skill has got to be linked to in terms of the need of the work.
Do you think what we also need is a balance of skills? Like an organization needs somebody who can be a spokesperson, it needs its accountant, its legal expert, its expert on systems, etc. Do you think that NGOs or people who want to go that way must be very careful to make sure that they have a good skills base from the very beginning?
Absolutely. And also from a board perspective, we find that because of corporate governance, or the lack thereof, the focus very much been in terms of boards and in terms of their roles and responsibilities and in terms of their skill set, their independence. So it's very important that you have a diverse board, however, sufficient skill, but also to be able to give back to the organizations. Because we find what's different from NGOs and corporates is that with NGOs, the boards they do it on a voluntary basis. They are not paid. So you find that their time constraints, it's quite a challenging thing. So they want to give back to these organizations. They want to give their skill back. However, because of the time limitations and challenges, that always doesn't happen, and you find that could also be a reason for a downfall of an organization.
Fair is our final question. Do you think ultimately, whether you're a corporate or NGO, that your biggest resource is in fact human resources, and we have to be good to people, have a good relationship, a positive relationship, and from there everything can flow?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think what we as accountants normally say PPS, which is people, process, and systems, without having good people, without having people that's passionate, that's committed, the processes and systems would be a no-brainer. So I agree with you that our people are very important, both in terms of who we serve, as well in terms of the community, as well as the people we're responsible for in terms of our employees. So I agree with you totally that people are very important to any success of any organization.
Faiz Mohammed, First Deputy Person, SANZAF, thanks for chatting to us.
Shukran for having me.
Afwan.
Shafiq.
Muhsin, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me, Shafiq.
Muhsin, just first of all, I have to ask, an engineer and an accountant, that's quite an unusual combination.
Let's put it this way. I'm sort of a non-conventional chartered accountant. It happened by accident. I think I need to thank my elder brother. He's also an accountant, a CA, and he opened my eyes to the world of auditing, which initially I thought that was boring, but it turned out to be quite an exciting change of career. And it gave me an opportunity to take the engineering background, build on it with a business background, and the two together on a phenomenal combination, which allows me to apply my mind in very different scenarios. Done a lot of consulting work, and within the waqf space, a lot of projects as well, and use it in the areas of strategy development, and help a lot of companies, both public and private sector, around turnaround strategies, system implementation, and I put up a good risk background as well. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, an engineer can build bridges.
Bridges that stand very long, very much like the Romans and the Turkish.
Okay. Let's have a look at some of the specific projects that you've been dealing with. I don't think many people realize how sophisticated some of these projects are and how much work goes on behind the scenes before we actually see, for example, a foundation being dug or a brick being laid.
I think people need to understand that waqf is a non-governmental organization. We rely totally on our volunteer base. And the beauty of having a volunteer base is we invite anybody and everybody to bring their skills forward, to give back to the Ummah, to give back to society, to give back to their communities. And our projects are driven by initially what the donors give back and what the Council of Mutualities, our trustees, make decisions in terms of where the revenue streams from the funds can be used in terms of what we call downstream projects or community enhancement, community upliftment. Some of our projects, of course, the borehole, drilling of boreholes or digging of boreholes. We know South Africa's is a water scarce country. We're sitting in one of the worst droughts we've ever seen, and going to identify where you need to drill a borehole is not a matter of just taking a drill and drilling a drilling rig and drilling a hole and saying water's going to come out. You need to understand exactly where the water tables are, where's the ideal spot to drill, have you got the right type of equipment, what are the costs of drilling, are you going to get X amount of cubic liters of water for how long, is it in the right spot, is it the right community, is the quality of water correct? I mean, our cataract projects as well, as people age, your eyesight becomes challenged, and I think today with modern technology, we're exposed to multitude of devices. I mean, everybody's got a smart device. We have this bad habit of, before going to bed, we want to look at our Facebook, we want to look at our LinkedIn, we want to read our emails in the dark, and that's not good for your eyesight. So, we've got to think about how we assist people in terms of their eyesight, and especially with the indigenous communities that can't afford to go for these operations, linking up with the Islamic Medical Association, or CAF is actually provide an opportunity and platform for many people who are losing their eyesight to be able to see again. I mean, you and I, we take eyesight for granted, but just, blindfold yourself for an hour and try and walk around, and you realize that the gift the Almighty has given us of sight is such a beneficial, such a benefit to us that losing it for an hour, you realize, what, it's so beneficial that, we should count our blessings every day. So these are some of the projects we've got, and the way we work our projects are structured in terms of resources, in terms of the money going in. We have full accountability to make sure that what we spend is kept full records of there. We want to make sure we have full accountability as well, because it is public funds at the end of the day. And the important thing is we don't want to waste money. Because money is a scarce resource. We want to maximize what we've got, and we want to make sure we get the best out of the projects as well.
We'll be back after this. With me, I have Muhsin Hassim, who is an engineer and an accountant. That's quite a combination. But he's been involved with waqf South Africa for a number of years on a number of projects. You're talking about maximizing the rand. That must be the biggest challenge of all, surely, because you go to a scenario and you want to help, and then I'm sure you agree that the zeros start to mount up and you think, oh my word, how do I go from here? How do you go from there?
And I think the challenge is to identify where's the greatest need. I'm fortunate when I studied engineering, I was a volunteer worker with St. John Ambulance, and I did a first aid course and also did a basic paramedic course. And one thing I was told by my instructors, when you get to an accident scene, don't run to the injured who screams the loudest. Go to the one that's quiet. And I'm originally from Standerton. I remember my brother and I were traveling back to Johannesburg one Monday morning, cold winter morning, and we came across a major accident scene. And that's exactly what happened. There was a woman in the passenger seat screaming her guts out, and there was a one in the driver's seat who was literally, excuse a pun, dead quiet. And I went to her, and I realized she was hysterical, and I went to the person in the driver's seat, and this person was unconscious. So you've got to identify where's the need. Is the community screaming the loudest, or is the community needing the greatest requirements? So you've got to prioritize in terms of saying, where's the greatest benefit? I've got limited resources. How do I identify where I can get the greatest benefit? Because at the end of the day, we are here to serve the Ummah. We are here to do for the pleasure of the Almighty, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we want to make sure that we do the best we can in terms of limited resources. And yes, sometimes it's a difficult decision. We're human, after all. So, as we can get more donors coming in with more funds in terms of waqfs, it allows us to grow the base, the pool of funds that we can invest, so therefore our revenue streams can be bigger, and we can have more projects to go through. And, we want to serve humanity, both Muslim and non-Muslim, and this is what our aim is. So the more money we can get, the better accountability we can have, the more transparency we can have with superb record keeping, and the skills base we're building up over time will allow us to do a lot more projects over time.
Do you think it's very important for an organization like waqf South Africa to enjoy the credibility you're talking about? Because doesn't it make it easier when you go to another downstream project, because you might have to work with a subcontractor who will say, okay, I've worked with you before, I can trust you, I know you're going to pay on time. Those things must be also important.
I think, when you look at the issue of credibility, it's an absolute thing. People only work with those who they trust. and it's based on relationships. It's based on the reputation. I mean, our brand is important. You know, when you talk about brands, would you go and buy a product from a brand you don't know? I mean, a typical example is when, when Hyundai or Kia came into South Africa, nobody wanted to buy it. We know of what happened with the Wheels of Africa when they brought Hyundai initially in. They went under, and of course Imperial had to rescue the brand and build it up. And once you build up a brand, you have dependency on it. People say, I recognize that brand and I can trust. And that's what waqf is doing in terms of the brand building as well, and our color schemes, as you can see on the banner behind us. But the most important thing is we need to ensure that we build up relationships with people who work with us. waqf is not owned by anybody. It's owned by the Ummah. You know, a lot of people say, are you waqf? I said, no. waqf is the Ummah is waqf. We want to make sure that our relationships are with everybody, those who support us, those who we support, both communities and those who get involved with us, because at the end of the day, it's a two-way street, because we ensure we build confidence with our downstream suppliers, with our upstream suppliers, and those who contract with us both ways, because ultimately, it's a partnership, and if you get the partnership right, it's a win-win.
Miriam, tell us something about your experiences. You started off as a volunteer, as most people do, and now you're sitting in an executive position, which some people would describe as a hot seat.
I don't think it makes a difference where you are. When you're a Muslim, and whether you're a volunteer or whether you're in a hot seat, your purpose is one, to serve the Almighty and to remember what your purpose is in the organization. Obviously, sitting in a hot seat probably gives you a little more access and a lot more responsibility.
Now, the people say you're very tough.
No, I don't think so. I think you have to do your job and you have to do it to the best of your ability. But waqf is built on a lot of people and a lot of volunteers, and volunteers in waqf are very dedicated. They believe in the concept. They're passionate about it. So you don't have to be tough. People do what they want to do.
Right, I was just teasing. But I mean, do you think that what makes it exciting and probably very invigorating is the fact that you're dealing with people who are motivated from the get-go? I mean, if you were, for example, working in another kind of business, it might be more difficult to motivate people. Do you think that's the nice thing about it, is that everybody's motivated because the common cause is good?
Absolutely. I think that everybody is really passionate about waqf. It is our lost heritage. I think people have seen the value in it, and those that have bought into it have done so fully. So when people come to it, the difficulty is that waqf works predominantly on volunteers. There are very few paid staff. So people do have full-time jobs, and yes, sometimes you have people that have good spaces and bad spaces, but by and large you always have people dedicated, ready to help you. Volunteer work is always difficult when you work truly on volunteers, but I think waqf is just special, and like I said, if people have bought into the concept, then they dedicated.
And of course, I mean, in the last 10 years, I mean, since you first came, I'm sure you'd agree, there's been a massive explosion in terms of waqf and what waqf South Africa has been doing. I mean, the growth curve is a very steep one.
I can't even explain it. When we just came in, we didn't even know when we were going to see our first few millions. It's grown. People have become a lot more aware of it. People have become, and this is due to waqf itself, is aware of it. They've seen the value. They've seen where the future lies. It's grown both financially, in terms of education, awareness, and we have a long way to go, but alhamdulillah, it's come a really long way.
How important is an event like today, a cadre training workshop? It's a very catchy title, but obviously it's a very empowering initiative.
Absolutely. I think empowerment is the key. Like I say, waqf was our lost heritage. There are people that don't even know what a waqf means. We know about trusts, and we know about all these million organizations, predominantly the Jewish. They have 1 million trusts. It's very similar. And yet we were given this 1400 years ago. And it is so beautiful. And for me, if we can implement it and we can get it moving, even the sky is not the limit.
How important do you think the idea of an waqf initiative is in a country like South Africa, where we have such big divides between the rich and the poor?
absolutely. If there's anything that draws me to waqf in South Africa, is that I think we can move mountains in South Africa if we can grow it to the level we have to. We only use the usufruct, which means that we have to have a big capital base. But it's something that I feel so passionately about, is that if we can get that capital base, we can address a lot of our problems in this country. And it's not restricted to Muslims, it's across the board. And being a Muslim for me is being a good humanitarian. And I think that's what waqf allows us to do, is that usufruct can be used for everybody. So I think in this country, it's like it's like we need it urgently. It couldn't come quick enough.
Do you think what people perhaps need to understand is that the whole waqf idea, it's a liberating concept, because what it does, once you've empowered a people, a group of people, they're actually liberated, and the government hasn't done it. We as a society have actually done it.
I think that it's really important. It's liberating. It's the sustainability that brings about the liberation, and it brings about a sustainable liberation, if I can call it so. And, my personal view is when people say we do the government's work, I'm really not interested. We're Muslims, we're humanitarians. Our duty, our responsibility is to where we live, with whom we hobnob. This is our society. Everyone in South Africa belongs to us. So I think, we just need to, for lack of a better word, sell the concept. Because if we can't, I think it has enormous potential.
Do you find it quite satisfying, like you might sit in the office doing something for 6 weeks and your head is down and you're working, and you lift your head up and you suddenly see in front of your eyes something has borne fruition? It must be satisfying.
Absolutely. Even if it's very little. Like I said at the side, waqf South Africa is growing. We've grown well, but we're not at the level that we should be. But anything little, it's absolutely satisfying. Just somebody telling you it made a difference to my life. That's the bottom line. That you need no more than that.
Do you often get great satisfaction? You stand in the background and you see a smile on somebody's face, or their facial expression changing from abject desperation to hope and light?
I think that happens, a lot, and it's very satisfying. I think people that, the cataract op is one such example where, the gift of sight is something non-negotiable, and people can just see. And just to see that brightness in people's faces, it's really important.
Do you think what's important about waqf is the fact that it's an organization based on passion and hard work?
Passion, hard work, dedication, and believe. I think you've got to believe in the concept. It's sustainability. It's succession. It's going to be here well beyond me and everyone else that's here. I think that's really the best part of it.
Miriam Remtula, Deputy CEO, waqf South Africa. Thanks for chatting to us.
Thank you.
And we've been talking to Miriam Remtula. Okay, and we have been talking to Miriam Remtula, the Deputy CEO of waqf, talking to us about the values of passion and dedication, and seeing the light in a person's face once they are empowered by a waqf. Time for a break. We'll be back after this.
لا 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 ما تسوى الدنيا تضيق خلقك الحمد لله ما حد بياخذ منك رزقك هدي وارتاح ثابر واطمح من حقك بس بلاش العين لا 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 ما تسوى الدنيا تضيق خلقك الحمد لله ما حد بياخذ منك رزقك هدي وارتاح ثابر واطمح من حقك